Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Black Moon Lilith Rising podcast. I am so excited to have Ruby Warrington, author of the upcoming book, Women Without Kids. I've just been waiting for this project with bated breath, and I'm just so thrilled that all of you are going to have a sneak peek into this amazing and groundbreaking commentary on something that is highly talked about in our global society. Welcome, Ruby.
Thanks for having me, Adama. I mean, it's interesting. You say that this is a much talked about topic, but what I keep hearing from people is no one's written a book like this. And I'm like, what? Right. But everyone's one of those things. Like, I feel like it's a conversation that's top of many people's minds right now. And yet it hasn't really kind of entered into the cultural conversation in a way that is, I don't know, just gives it the weight and the respect that it deserves, actually.
Well, you're no stranger to these types of topics. So just a little background on Ruby. Ruby Warrington is the creator of the term sober curious. This is another topic that people shied away from. And this was released in 2018. And also had a 1 million download podcast of the same title. Her work has spearheaded a global movement to reevaluate our relationship to alcohol. Other works include Material Girl, Mystical World in 2017, the Numinous ASTRO deck in 2019, Ruby's very busy, and the Sober Curious Reset in 2020. She has over 20 plus years of experience as a lifestyle journalist and editor. And Ruby is known as an astute culture commentator and true thought leader. She's also the founder of self-publishing imprint Numinous Books. And Women Without Kids will be published in March 2023.
Yes. It's coming out. In the US, it's March. In the UK, it's April. But yeah, we're coming into the birth canal for this one. Yeah.
And literally, you're a genius, because people that are familiar with the publishing process know this probably takes 2 or 3 years between it being an idea to actually getting into publishing. So you're way ahead of the topics that are all over TikTok, social media, press. And it's just really something that you really just thought of this way before a lot of people were talking about it.
This has been a hallmark of my whole career. Like, my background is in journalism, and I was very much drawn to kind of like cultural commentary, social trend reporting, that sort of thing. Because I just, I do seem to have an ability to sort of sense into the way the conversation is going before it's kind of got there. I mean, I have Mercury in Aries, so that's like thinking a little bit ahead of the pack. And it's weird. Like, I'm an Aries sun as well. And I do think that I'm patient. I kind of like, can we just get to the point already? Let's get to the point already. So I'm always, my birthday's coming up, and I was reflecting again on how, like, at least 3-4 months before my birthday, I'll start thinking of myself as that age. It's like I'm always thinking a little bit ahead. Yeah. Which it has helped pave my career in terms of talking about these subjects, which are kind of emerging, I suppose. And then, like you said, I pitched this book. I was first thinking about this book in the summer of 2020. So by the time the publishing process is caught up, it's kind of like the cultural conversation has kind of caught up and seems to be ready for it. So it's worked out for me.
You are a complete visionary, because that's something that's hard for a lot of commentators or people to really do, creatives to do, is to think ahead of the curve, because it can be scary to pitch something that it's not really widespread. It's not the status quo, and to break that status quo. Don't you have Pluto in your midheaven as well?
I do. Yes.
In opposition to the Aries?
Well, yes, it's opposing the Aries, and it's also squaring my Saturn, Moon, Mars. So I've got a cardinal T-square, which is kind of, that it's weird. Like, Pluto is sort of it's on the midheaven. It's that North Star kind of energy. And so I do think that part of my career path has been to overturn taboos, right? To dig into taboos and to kind of aid the evolutions in society, I think, you know, not to think too kind of like in too grandiose terms, but that's kind of how I operate. Yeah.
Totally. And also the midheaven, because is it conjunct your midheaven?
Just about. So my midheaven is 7 degrees Libra and it's at 10.
So literally that's the maternal or mother energy.
Yes, of course.
So
yes.
Also Pluto rules, it's not Scorpio energy, but Pluto does rule over the sign of Scorpio. And we know Scorpio represents things like
the reproductive organs. Absolutely. Exactly. And sexual energy, which is life force energy, like in its most sort of literal basic form. Like you can't really actually, and yet we do, you can't really have a conversation about motherhood and particularly our choices about whether or not we want to be parents and not talk about female sexuality and like autonomy over our sexual beings and where we put our sexual energy and how we, you know, it's all actually tied in. It's a very scorpionic subject. I hadn't really thought about it like that until you mentioned it. But yes, you know, when I first spoke to my astrologer colleague, Bess Matassa, about this idea, she just went, oh my God, this is your chart, you know, because I have like Moon and Saturn conjunct in Cancer in the 8th house.
Yep. Your Cancer moon. Yeah.
Yep. So.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, it's very aligned.
I want to say, it's square your Pluto.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah. Wow.
And my sun Mercury in a looser square. But I actually know the Moon Saturn in a very tight square with my sun Mercury.
Wow. And you know, we're going into the Aries Libra, not only North and South node cycle, but eclipses.
Ooh.
This year as well, starting July.
Oh my goodness.
May, July.
Yeah. Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. So this is such a major topic today. So of course I want to first ask, with the fertility rate decreasing, as well as more women opting out of having children, what really sparked this idea? Like, was there like a trigger a few years ago, or has this been brewing for like 10 years?
Well, I mean, this is a subject that like I said, my background's in journalism, and during my 30s, I was asked to write on this topic multiple times by various magazine editors. And it was always positioned as, this is so strange. It's so strange that you don't want children. Why don't you want children? People would kind of like scratch their heads and have me write articles about it. So it's just it's a subject that's been following me around, I guess you could say, because I've always been not necessarily vocally, but confidently child-free, you know? That said, a lot of people asking questions about it, I kind of internalized and questioned myself intensely as well. Really? What's wrong with you? Why don't you? Like, you know? And the impetus to write the book actually came from a very personal place as I kind of sort of entered my early 40s, looking ahead to my middle 40s, and even thinking about menopause. I realized that I found myself feeling quite excited about this next transition, you know, again, which is another controversial subject, the thought of being excited about menopause. But I read a book on the subject that reframed menopause as really the gateway to a woman's second adulthood. It's this hormonal shift that kind of changes your capacity to kind of show up and create in the world in a positive, potentially positive way, which was kind of groundbreaking. But looking ahead and realizing that sounds exciting, I realized simultaneously, I have zero regrets about not having a child. There's not one cell in my being that is going, time is running out. You should have done this. And if you haven't, you should do this now. There was just no sense of panic. If anything, just a kind of a sense of relief that I had stayed true to what I have always known is right for me, and that I hadn't listened to all those other voices. And I realized that I wanted to extend that back to younger women, to extend it forward to maybe women like me who had been subjected to a lot of questioning around their decision. And then I kind of zoomed out in my journalistic way that I do and noticed that, well, yeah, the birth rate has been dropping steadily globally for the past century, apart from the baby boom of the 1950s and 70s, 1950s to 70s, when the baby boomers were born, right? Apart from that little blip, the birth rate has been steadily declining, and that decline has dipped even lower in the 21st century. So I thought, this is actually very interesting. I've always felt like a real outlier, like this kind of anomaly in my decision not to have children. But evidently, many, many, many women, millions of women all around the world are either having fewer children or they're having none at all. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't be seeing this steep drop off in the birth rate. And it made me realize that there was this, what I've called an unsung sisterhood of women who were grappling with this very, very important life choice, very conflicted, which many people have lots of very loud opinions about, without anywhere to come together to talk about this, any kind of forum for really digging into the deeper motivations, the deeper impacts, the deeper factors kind of like influencing our decisions in this area and our feelings about this subject even. And that was kind of when I realized that I wanted this to be my next book. So as with all of my books, it came even with when I launched The Numinous and I started investigating astrology, it was because I really was fascinated by the subject and I wanted to learn about it. And with Sober Curious, it was because I had been questioning my drinking and I wanted to find a new way to think about that and talk about that. So it came from a very personal place, but it speaks to a very universal place that we're at, I think.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because my next question is, do you mind sharing the original title of the book? I saw you had some merch, so I figured the question would be yes.
Well, this is the thing. So on it, like literally having that thought process that I was just describing, thinking about menopause, literally this title just went like, I do this because it felt like it literally just downloaded and it was like there. The title was Selfish Cunt. Because I realized, well, and it was partly that I realized in looking back at age 42 or 43, looking back at my life, I felt so relieved and grateful that I had been free to live the life that I wanted and to make the choices that I wanted for myself. And immediately what came up was, what a selfish cunt. What a selfish cunt to have lived a life that prioritizes your own desires and needs. And then immediately after that was like, well, that's massively problematic. The fact that me living a life that feels aligned and satisfying and pleasurable to me makes me a selfish cunt. And then I realized, oh, wait, literally, because I didn't do the thing with my cunt that I am supposed to do as somebody who was born a biological woman. So it was the working title of the project right through to the very, very end. And in the end, after much internal wrestling, I decided not to go with that title because I didn't want to alienate people. I appreciate it could be, depending who you're talking to, it could be very confronting. And I didn't want to put people off who could potentially benefit from the book, but I couldn't resist using it inside the book. And honestly, like the reaction I've had pretty much across the board, I mean, I would honestly say I haven't had one person who has said, I find that offensive. I think that women en masse are ready to just say, no, that's not okay. It's not okay that living lives, the lives that suit us, is seen as selfish. And it's not okay, actually, that the worst word you can call somebody is a word for a part of our anatomy that has been so policed, so politicized, so violated. Like, it's just wrong. And so I think there's a reclamation of those two words that I think we're ready for it.
It's like really like it's giving dark feminine energy because it's just like
thinking that
selfishness is frowned upon. Like as women, I think we're all socialized. Like we have to be cooperative, we have to people please, and we have to keep silent, or we have to, do what we're expected to do. And this is really like you're taking your power back. This is very similar to what Lilith did.
It's super Lilith. It is Lilith. This is literally, she was the original selfish cunt.
Yeah. She's like, no.
No.
And I think it's really interesting because just going back to what you said about when you told people that you didn't want to have children, there was just always a response. Do you think that triggered, and a lot of time from women, do you think that triggered some, I don't want to say it's internalized misogyny, but it basically triggered their life choices? Like, I think the boomer age, like a lot of them had kids because they felt like they had to. Like, I don't even think sometimes my mom wanted.
They didn't have a choice. Adama, they didn't have a choice. Literally until 50 years ago. it was only with the advent of accessible, safe, and effective birth control,
Yep.
safe, legal abortion, and access to education and employment opportunities that women have actually had the option. So boomer women didn't really have the option. For some women, that option has always been there. For the majority, it has not. Like, reproduction, being a mother, has been a biological imperative. And I think that as with, Lilith is also all about shadow work, right? So I feel like anytime there's like a violent response or a vitriolic response, often it's really indicative of an area where there's just a lot of unprocessed shadow, a lot of simmering resentment, and in this case, very righteous resentment around the fact of how little autonomy women have had over our lives until very recently. It's really, I write in the book about how the generations of women born from the mid 1970s onwards are the first generations to have actually truly had access to choice. And that choice is still not available to like millions of women around the world. And that choice is very much wrapped up with concepts of privilege as well. And so it's still a work in progress, right? True choice in this area. And so, yeah, I think that the strong emotional reactions that people have, it just reflects how much unprocessed shadow there is to be processed. Like, now is the time that it's coming up. This is my Pluto on the midheaven talking. It's like, now is the time for us to do this work,
Absolutely. What can you name some of just the most offensive things that you've heard from other people? I'm curious, because I think a lot of my listeners have gone through this, and I mean, I know I have my own stories of things I've heard people say.
Things like, you're just so self-obsessed, you typical selfish child-free people. It typically revolves around just being selfish, self-obsessed, immature. I was once told by a shaman that no one would take me seriously as a woman until I had children, that I'd always just be seen as immature. I mean, these are the kind of classic things. But it's interesting as well. Like, I feel like perhaps it's because I just have been quite confident. I haven't really had any major kind of nasty pushback from people in my life directly. It's mainly been just a few comments here and there online. But yeah, the things that people feel permitted to say in this subject, again, to me, that's just like, women's bodies and our choices about our bodies are still very much seen as public property in some ways, Yeah,
I think in the times before the 70s, let's even just think back to like in the 19th, 20th centuries, early 20th centuries, it was just expected for women literally to have like 6 kids.
Oh, more. From the age of 60, from the age that you were old enough to be married, you would be continually having children, either pregnant, nursing, basically until, life expectancy at the turn of the 20th century was 49, which is around the age that women experience menopause, and that was obviously not just due to the fact that women's lives were very much about just kind of procreation. It was obviously, there've been huge advances medically and societally since then as well. But I think it's just quite interesting that, so many women used to die in childbirth as well. That was incredibly common. That was a reason for the lower life expectancy.
Yeah. Do you, so like, how did you infuse feminism and kind of reclaiming your feminine power into this book?
I didn't really set out for it to be like a feminist book. It's so funny. I feel like I went into this so naively, not realizing like how much was there to unpack. I kind of use the way I've structured it. I sort of talk about just my own development from my early childhood upbringing, because I also look at how, the family we were raised in can influence very much our feelings about creating a family of our own and what family is. So my own upbringing through my kind of early childhood development, through my teens into my 20s, and just sort of through different life stages. And I suppose just really looking at my life and how I have been socialized as a woman and why it became a deeply feminist book, because you can't I couldn't help but see that so many of my choices, so many of the expectations that were projected on me were the result of patriarchy, basically, you know? And within that, just noticing how much work there still is to be done in terms of enacting true equality between the genders. It's not as simple as like giving women the same options as men. That's like kind of one side of the story. The unfinished work of feminism, I think, is about decentering masculinity, or like de-privileging masculinity and masculine values in general. Like one thing that really came up throughout the writing, which I wasn't necessarily anticipating being such a big piece of the book, was just how devalued mothers and mothering are, you know, and how there's a huge debt to society to be kind of like paid in that area. Like, but that means revaluing the feminine as a whole, you know, and it means revaluing caring and nurturing and these sorts of qualities which don't really have much place or aren't given much value, certainly not given monetary value in our like capitalist patriarchal society. So yeah, I kind of couldn't write this book without unpacking all of that stuff too, you know.
Totally. I think it's wild that it's like the government, actually this global society, I think like China, and there's certain countries that this is really an issue. They are talking about it as if it's an issue, but especially the United States, they're doing nothing to support the women that do choose to have children. So they're not making it like easy.
Right.
And then it's like when women are just like, I don't want to do that. Like I can't afford it. I have to work. I'm not gonna just stick the child in daycare. Our world is just crumbling. The climate is horrific. The environment is horrific. You all are not creating the environment for people to want to do this. So all that's going to manifest is less and less women wanting to do that. So do you talk about that at all? Like all of the societal crap that's going on that's really also deterring?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I talk about, you know, the term canaries in the coal mine. Like women without kids are sort of the canaries in the coal mine. We're kind of indicative of the fact that conditions on planet Earth generally are just becoming less and less hospitable to even the concept of child rearing and family formation, you know? So yeah, I go really deep into all of that. And the call to action is not to specific women, because specific women are kind of making the decisions accordingly. We're sort of doing our piece in a way by like not bringing more children into this broken system. The call to action is more to, you know, politicians, industry, corporations to enact reform that actually values family formation. You know, the response from the US government to women having fewer children is to ban abortions. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is, it's just so misguided and so short-sighted. And again, it just puts the responsibility and the burden on individual women to kind of like fix this problem of, well, the problem of aging. An aging society is what most people like. China are kind of freaking out. Japan are freaking out about this. South Korea actually has the lowest birth rate of all. The concept is that we're going to have too many old people and not enough young people to care for them. Well, I mean, there's just so many issues. The solution is not just to have more kids. The solutions need to be much more nuanced and wide-ranging and thoughtful and individualistic. You know, it's there's a lot. I just think this is almost like the most important subject that we're facing as a society right now, and it has its tentacles in all of the other big important subjects that we're kind of trying to grapple with at the moment. We're in a very Plutonian time. Like we've just come out of Pluto in Capricorn, or coming out of Pluto in Capricorn, which is a dismantling of all of these patriarchal domination systems. And so what we'll see going forward as Pluto moves into Aquarius is, I hope, many more individualistic kind of responses and solutions to systems change.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about Pluto and Aquarius and like what you think?
It's funny, I've only just started thinking about it. I've been in this Plutonian kind of like T-square / cross scenario, as Pluto and Capricorn has been kind of like squaring and opposing all of those planets we were talking about earlier. It's been a very, very intense period for me, past 10 years or so.
Imagine.
So I'm personally very excited about Pluto and Aquarius, because it's finally like, oh God, I can probably breathe a little bit.
Yeah, you've got some sextiles,
right? Yes. Oh my God.
I'm on deck, but for another day.
Yeah, right. But no, I've started thinking about it recently, because in my day job, I help people concept and pitch and write their books, right? And so many of the projects that are coming my way have this real Pluto and Aquarius feel, which is very much empowerment of the individual transformations, kind of as part of a more collective transformation. Just thinking about how technology is going to continue to reshape our world. I mean, you know, I like to zoom out and look big picture. On the one hand, we've got this problem of an aging population. And on the other hand, we've got billions of dollars being invested in AI, which is going to replace the need for human beings anyway. You know, it's like there are already less and less jobs for humans, which is contributing massively to economic inequality, because so many human jobs have been replaced by machine jobs, right? And we're just going to see that continue. Like there are going to be fewer jobs, fewer economic opportunities for human beings, the more AI that is implemented. And so, I don't know, can AI start paying taxes into Social Security? Why not? I think these are the kinds of solutions we might see with Pluto and Aquarius.
Maybe they'll have mechanical wombs, so
quite possibly. Quite possibly.
You don't have to do it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, these are the kind of radical evolutions that I think we might see with Pluto in Aquarius. I don't know. I haven't really looked into what was happening globally the last time we had this transit, but like, yeah.
It was I
think it wasn't like the Civil War.
So it was the Revolutionary War in America, and then the French as well, which I mean, that does reverberate collectively.
Yeah.
But it was the energy of revolution. And I think right now, especially, this is a revolution, like you're saying, of the individual on a collective scale. But then it's also a revolution in our values. Like Capricorn was such old, traditional, structured values, and the opposite polarity of Capricorn, we have Cancer. And that was a big interplay in like 2019, 2020, we had the nodes there. But I really think that this is now like changing this patriarchal world and having us question it. Like, I even think, so China, everyone don't quote me on this. You can correct me, because I'm sure you've done research on this on the book, but they found themselves in this place because they had the one child rule. And then also they didn't want a lot of girls being born. That was South Korea, actually, I think, Korea. They championed men being born. So now they have an overpopulation of men, like single men. Right. And so basically this has been a tradition to just squash the feminine and to squash women, to now where it's just like they're realizing like, oh wait, like actually the feminine women are valid, they're here, like what are we going to do without them?
It's another symptom of masculinity and the masculine being privileged above all. And I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's just an example of kind of like, I feel like the earth, the universe is built to balance, to seek balance, and naturally balance itself when things are just kind of left to flow. And all of these human systems of privilege and hierarchy, ultimately, that have been built to privilege the few people who are kind of in control and who hold the power, have created massive imbalances globally. And that's showing up now in this kind of skewed distributions of birth rate and things like this. So yeah, it just feels like there's a massive rebalancing that needs to take place. And that, in fact, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting with the China piece. It kind of mirrors, in a way. I had a conversation with somebody as a research interview for the book, and she was reflecting on how Roe v. Wade, like abortion was legalized in the United States at a time when we were coming out of this baby boom, and politicians were concerned about overpopulation. They were concerned that the population was growing too fast, and so abortion was legalized. And now we see the opposite. They're concerned that there are too many old people well, we've got too many old people because there was a baby boom 50 years ago and now they're all old, right? So now the abortion rights are being rolled back again. So yeah, I don't know. I would like to see more empowerment of individuals to make the choices that just feel right for them on an emotional, psychological, material level. I think the more individuals can be really empowered to not only make those choices, but to really understand themselves and what does make them feel happy, fulfilled, what is going to be the best choice for them, the more that can occur in that area, the more sort of a natural rebalancing we will see, hopefully.
Yeah. So in terms of your process with writing this book, what were like the healing aspects of it for you? And then what were the hardest, here I am with the hard-hitting questions, Scorpio here.
I know.
What were the most painful parts of it?
Oof.
Like the healing and the painful, because I'm sure this also comes from a personal place, like your own relationships with your parents and just how that shaped your decision to not want to have kids.
Well, as is the way it goes, the most painful parts were the most healing parts. Right? That's often how it is. Yeah, it brought me into, and this I was conscious of wanting to do this. I wasn't conscious of how it would unfold. I wanted to experience a real deep reckoning with my family of origin, my relationship with my parents, even my relationship, or not, rather my non-relationship with my grandmothers, and going back through my lineage. Like I haven't felt any connection to my ancestors really at all. That's just kind of been the way it has been in my family. And not least, yeah, my relationship with my mother sort of being the prime piece that I wanted to acknowledge, because I think even though it wasn't something that I'd become kind of like really conscious of, there was an awareness that my relationship with my own mother had to have had some impact on how I felt about becoming a mother myself. So that was most definitely the most painful stuff to really look at and the most healing. And I say that because I had to show the book to my mom. I couldn't write about this and put it out into the world without having her see it and without honestly having her okay it. Like I didn't want to hurt her. And yet I knew what I was writing about was deeply personal and quite revealing, and I wanted her to be comfortable with it. And the conversations we had throughout that process were just devastating. But ultimately, like, they've brought us so much closer. We have a much better understanding of each other and our shared history. And I feel closer to her than I ever have. And she's reflected that she feels the same way too. So that has been incredibly healing for us. But it was very painful to kind of go through it. And I think, yeah, just acknowledging, you know, when you're kids, life is just life and things just are the way they are. I hadn't ever reflected on what a loss it was to have never really had a relationship with my grandparents, you know, and to never really have had a relationship with any of my aunts and uncles and cousins. And this is all because of various kind of like family estrangements and resentments and things. I just haven't ever had any of those sort of warm, loving family relationships. And it was the same kind of for my parents. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that I wouldn't think, oh, I want to have a family because that's how I'm going to find fulfillment. That's going to be my heart space. You know, that family to me has always felt kind of alienating and uncomfortable. And so, of course, I didn't want to create a family. So that helped me make sense of that choice. But it was very painful to reckon with that being my experience of family. And I found myself doing a lot of grieving around that, grieving the thing that I never had actually, which is like a really loving, warm family environment. And so, yeah, it was very, very challenging on a personal level. But like I said, this again is so Plutonian of me. I kind of knew that I had to go there. I knew that I had to confront that and really go to the heart of that and really get into the shadows, or it was going to be something that I would just kind of, that would be, I don't know, just a pain point for the rest of my life, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, definitely our early childhood, our experiences, and some of what you're saying even resonates with me personally. It really shapes our wants and desires as adults.
Mm-hmm.
And you think that, and I think this about myself in a subconscious way, all of that was meant to happen so that I could break these generational curses and also really find myself, like find my, and not, because I'll, you know, if you look at some people that may have like 10 brothers and sisters and a big family, it may have been more challenging for them to feel that resistance to get out of their hometown, to pursue a career or a life path. I don't even want to say career, but a calling to transform the world. If you don't have that resistance as a child, sometimes you kind of stay in that comfort zone. So do you feel that it positively made, it's like an alchemist, it made you who you are today? If you didn't have that, you wouldn't even be working on this project.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I don't necessarily like the term or the, sorry, I'm stroking my cat who's come up to join me, but I don't necessarily subscribe to the kind of everything happens for a reason. However, because I think a lot of things shouldn't happen and they're very painful and they're abuses of power and they shouldn't happen and they don't happen for a reason. and astrology shows us that we each come with a unique path. I can see all of this in my astrological chart, of course. And I do believe that, yeah, I've had the experiences that I've had, particularly as it pertains to the family I was born into and the culture and the society that I was born into and influenced by. Yeah, I do believe that, of course, it's all of it has made me who I am, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without it, you know? I have a lot of, I've come to a place of deep acceptance of it all, you know? And at times, gratitude for what I've experienced as well. Yeah. Not least because having experienced what I have has given me so much empathy for other people who've had dysfunctional family backgrounds. And I do feel like part of my calling is to help bring people who felt like outsiders for whatever reason together in our kind of outsiderishness, you know, that feels like it's a kind of a signature of my career and my work, I suppose. And I'm grateful to be a person who can do that, because so many people reflect back to me that they're thankful to be seen and to be acknowledged in their experiences that have felt very othering or alienating, you know?
Yeah. I love how you call yourself a book doula, because I think that also society, people forget, yes, women are in the feminine is creative, meaning, yes, they can birth children, but there's ideas, there's books, there's movements. I mean, someone like Oprah Winfrey, for example, is literally a notoriously child and husband free. And she is the mother to millions of people and ideas and movements and philanthropies. And so do you believe that this book can kind of start to change people's mindsets about what women's role is as creators? Like, it's so funny, like literally I've gone to so many baby showers. I'm of that age, like people just popping them out. That's cute and cool. I'm happy to go. But like, I'm literally releasing 2 books next year. I'm like, I'm not gonna get a fucking book shower, and all I get is like, oh, that's
book shower.
Yeah. Like I literally, like, I mean, I just went through this process. It's like, I mean, I've never given birth, so I don't know if it's gonna really happen, but it was a painful process in that it's something and you, like, you sacrificed a certain amount of time in your life. You're going through internal pain and inner transformation to birth these stories. And these are for other people. You're bearing your soul. Like, you feel like this will help change the minds of some of society? Because I just feel like people are still in this, like, and a lot of women in this patriarchal mindset, it's like a friend is telling you like, oh, I'm doing these books and da-da-da. Oh my gosh, like, let's throw a book shower for you. Like, no one thinks that way still. And it's very like, you're not accomplished until you pop out a kid. Like, you can be doing all kinds of things, and it's like, there's still that mindset of the collective. At least that's what I observe.
Oh, definitely. I love the idea of a book shower. I think we should start I think you should have one, first of all. Please invite me. I love the idea of a book shower, because the traditional kind of purpose of a baby shower is to remind women of her community and of the support network that she has in place as she embarks on this challenging and exposing and vulnerable new stage of her life. And putting a book out can be very vulnerable, frightening, confusing. You can often feel very alone in the situation. So I think that's a really, really great idea. I do, absolutely. This book is absolutely...
Even not just the book, Shara, but it's like if a woman, I don't know, she graduates med school, or she gets her law degree, or I don't know, she's going on the trip of her lifetime and she finally is able to afford it. Like, I just think that people don't celebrate the like wins of women unless they're popping out a kid or they're getting married.
It's true.
So I'm like, we're still in this mindset that women, that's all women are good for.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, my cat is like literally pushing my computer like this with his
my voice. Oh my God.
Larry, stop it.
Larry's lit. Let's see Larry.
Oh my God. I think he's into this conversation. But yes, you're absolutely right.
I'm your baby.
I mean, I talk about how my fur baby, oh God, that term. In the very opening scene of the book, I talk about how my whole life I've measured my achievements against those of women who have had children. And I always come up short, because no matter how many things I've achieved, no matter how much work I've done in the world, no matter how much good I've done in the world, there's always someone who's done all of that and had a child. It's like, it's never kind of enough that this has been my kind of offering, that this has been my creative output. So I definitely want us to question that. That said, I do think that mothering is a very specific role that also is actually weirdly, ironically, very undervalued, because it's seen as something that comes naturally to women. The extreme sacrifices and challenges that women are faced with in motherhood aren't acknowledged as such. If she doesn't naturally take to being a mother, if she finds it difficult, then she has failed, like there's something wrong with her. And so I definitely want to acknowledge that piece as well. And as for childbirth, I mean, honestly, I do think that a fear of childbirth is one of the reasons I never wanted to have a child. I've always just been absolutely petrified by the idea. And like I said, many women used to die in childbirth. I have a friend who does family constellations therapy, and she says anyone who has a deep fear of childbirth, there are probably women in your lineage who did die in childbirth, basically. And so many women, I think I was reading an article the other day that said the incidence of death amongst pregnant women and women actually giving labor has increased recently. And so this is it's still a life or death situation, and birthing a book, as much as birthing a book is challenging, doesn't contain quite that same life or death. So I'm wary of calling my books my babies, but there are similarities for sure. And I did used to. It's just I've developed more kind of awareness around that.
Yeah, it's I think in terms of the, what do they call it, unrecognized labor or emotional labor of women. It's really interesting, because in this modern age, after the women's liberation movement and more women we're not equal in every position and organization across the board, but women are doing a lot more equal to a man. But then on top of it, the women that have children, a lot of them then take on that burden on top of everything else. So it's like women are expected to do it all while men don't have that same expectation. It's like, I think it's like billions of dollars of like unpaid,
absolutely,
unrecognized labor by the mothers in the country. Yeah,
absolutely. And there are definitely sort of like pushes towards acknowledging that. Like in the 1970s, there was a whole movement, Wages for Housework, which was essentially seeking to redress that balance and seeking to give proper economic value to the unpaid work of child rearing, basically, and homekeeping, which was beginning to be seen as actually vital to the functioning of the economy, right? So I sort of feel like we're ripe for an emerging conversation around that, where that's back on deck, and we're like, we still haven't figured this out. Mothers are massively underprivileged in our society. I acknowledge in the book that not having kids makes me more like a man. Like, it just means that I can in many areas operate on the same level and with the same expectations and with the same entitlement even as a man. And in fact, the motherhood, you know, the gender wage gap that gets spoken about so often is actually a motherhood wage gap. Women without kids earn virtually the same as men, and it's mothers who earn significantly less, working mothers who earn significantly less than men, which is a very clear indication that this mothering is kind of like the role that feminism left behind, I think.
Yep.
You know?
100%. Yeah. Do you feel like when you, because I've noticed a difference, like not having children, just the reactions that my partner's older than me. He's never had children as well. And no one questions that decision with men. You don't,
Right.
you know, when you tell us like, oh, I'm dating so-and-so, da, 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 da. Like, oh, how nice. Let's see pictures. Okay, great, cute. Like, and they move on. But with me, it's like, and I'm sorry I'm throwing any friends listening under the bus, but a question like, are you going to have kids? When are you getting married? I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah. This is the conditioning.
Like, because me, and I actually had this conversation with him. I'm like, do you notice that? Do you get that? He's like, no, that's straight internalized misogyny that I've never in my life said I was like dating someone seriously or living with someone. And then the question is next, are you going to have kids? Are you getting married?
Right.
Never.
Right.
For men.
It's not. It's just not.
A 60-year-old bachelor and nobody's questioning that. Oh, good for you. Or
exactly.
No, he's doing his career. He's doing this. But then if it's a woman, it's like, what are you going to do? You don't want to have kids?
You'll regret it. Who will look after you? Yeah, all of that stuff. It's just,
what about your advice?
Old conditioning. And what I will say, I've spoken with my husband about this at length, and he says that amongst men, there is a sense, and he picks up, and he's a Pisces, so he picks up on these things. He picks up on like a feeling of being less than because he's not a dad. It's not spoken, it's not commented on, but there's a feeling of you're not one of us. You know, so I think that men do experience that, but it's not that people don't have that knee-jerk kind of feeling that they're entitled to ask that question or have an opinion about it or push you in that direction. But he can definitely feel like, oh yeah, what went wrong kind of thing, you know?
So wow. Well, mine's an Aries. So. But that's really interesting because it's like more, I guess maybe it's like the boundaries are there to like leave them alone.
Maybe
with women.
Maybe.
I think this is an interesting question. So for women who are deciding, like, let's say like 35 and under, because I know a good number that are like, I don't want kids. But they'll get this backlash that like, well, you'll regret it and da 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 when you're older. Like, what's your advice for them? Like, I'm not asking for myself.
Well, it's so individualistic, right?
Right.
I'd love to sit with each of them in person and have an actual conversation about it. Hopefully my book one of the things I really hope is that will inspire these kinds of conversations among women, around why they're making these choices, why they feel the way they do about becoming a mother, like, and just kind of, I think the more we can talk about it openly with one another, we'll be able to become more secure in the choices we're making because we understand why we're making those choices. It won't just be the result of like conditioning or external pressure or whatever. So I guess my first piece of advice would be talk it out with a therapist, talk about it with your friends, read up around it, like really question, like, okay, if someone's saying, why don't you want kids? My answer always used to just be, I just don't. And that was enough of an answer for me. I just don't. I've always been very connected to my intuition and my inner knowing. And it's always actually felt like an abandonment of myself and deeply uncomfortable to not go with what I know is right for me. Again, Aries.
Yeah.
That said, I just think that, the more we can kind of like trust our own intuition and find ways to tap into our intuition, the better, because this is such an emotionally loaded topic. It's really hard not to be swayed by other people's opinions and things like that. So yeah, talk to people about it. Don't be afraid of having the conversation. Ask your friend. Now I would ask, if someone said, why don't you want kids? Why do you want kids? Like, that's not in an obnoxious way, but just to like, why? Because like, I don't really understand what that urge is or where that comes from. Maybe explain it to me. Like, why do you want to have kids? But yeah, I think there's a sociologist called Orna Donut who wrote an amazing book called Regretting Motherhood, based on a study that she did around, I think she had 23 women, all different ages, who willingly would say, I regret having children. Like, I regret having had my kids, which is so taboo. Like, you never hear that, right? And reading that book was fascinating. And it really helped me pose the question to myself, I might regret not having kids. It would be worse to regret having kids. And another conversation I had with a friend shone a light on the fact that this is one of only 2 decisions a human can make that is irreversible. To bring a new life into the world that you will be responsible for, whether or not you end up being that person's caregiver, you'll be tied, connected, responsible on some level for that human being for the rest of your life. It's an irreversible decision. The other irreversible decision is to take your own life. It's life and death. These are only 2 life and death decisions. So it's not something to be entered into lightly. And it's not something to be entered into because other people have opinions about what you should be doing. You know?
Absolutely.
Pluto in the midheaven comes out again. A little bit of life and death right at the end there.
I can take it. I'm a Scorpio. I like
can.
to dive deep. What do you love the most about not having children?
For me, again, moon in Cancer, like, I need alone time. If I don't get enough alone time, and it's more alone time than most people would probably think is healthy even, I get so burnt out and so frazzled, and a day of solitude, a few days of solitude just brings me right back to myself and fills me up again. And the thought of not being able to have time on my own is petrifying. So for me, it's being able to have solitude. It's really important to me.
Yeah. Well, it's that water energy. I can totally relate.
I need to go into my shell to like recharge and nurture on the inside, you know, and I just, I'm a massive introvert. And of course, yeah, my research showed that extroverts tend to have more children. Having children means bringing more people into your world who are going to be around you all of the time. And some people couldn't imagine not having that and would feel deeply lonely without that constant kind of connection with other people. Great. Have kids. Create beings who are going to be around you all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when is the book available? I know right now it's for pre-order.
Yes.
As we record this in February, but when can people pre-order it? When does it launch?
You can pre-order now. And if you pre-order, you can enter your details at www.womenwithoutkids.com. And you will get a free, like, a book reading group guide, which if you are going to read the book with a friend, with a group of friends, as I recommend, because it's such a good conversation starter, that reading group guide is going to be really helpful. And you'll also be entered into a prize draw to win one of my selfish cunt tote bags.
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely
if you pre-order. But the book will be out March 28th in the US, and it's April 13th in the UK. So yeah, you can mark your calendars and just order it on the day if you don't want to wait.
Just a couple days before or after Pluto peaks into Aquarius.
Oh my goodness. And she's an Aries baby. I've wanted to have an Aries book baby since my first one. I kind of timed this one.
I love it because this is like the first, this is like the birth of the new year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you're having this during Black Moon Lilith and Leo. Which I think is so fitting. Leo rules over children.
Fitting. Oh my goodness. The astrology for this book is on point. I mean, it lined up with when it was coming out in my publisher's schedule, but I did get to pick the exact date. So I have Jupiter and Mercury conjunct my sun on the day that it comes out. It was like, that's about as good as you can get for a book launch. So
and also Black Moon Lilith, because so mean Black Moon Lilith is in Leo for 9 months this year, but Black Moon Lilith in Cancer, we're going to still, when we look at the true, we're going to still experience some of that this year. It was really heavy last year.
Interesting.
Black Moon Lilith in Cancer while you were
doing those deep dives with my mom. Oh my God. Of course.
Yeah.
That means she was right on my moon Saturn conjunction, which it's my mum and dad and my 8th house of womb and like, lineage. So it's like, of course, it all, and this is why I love astrology. I didn't map it out. I didn't plan it that way. And yet it always lines up, and I find that so supportive. Going back to the thing about things happening on a timeline that is kind of aligned,
Yeah. The universe always, it never fails to, even as an astrologer, I'm like, how is this correct right now?
I know.
So where can everyone find you on like social media and all that stuff?
So I'm kind of only on Instagram at Ruby Warrington.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's my social media handle. I've been more active there because I really only like being on social media when I have something I'm excited to talk about. And I'm really excited to talk about this. So that's all happening at Ruby Warrington. I have a podcast, Women Without Kids, which I created from all the research interviews that I did for the book. So that's airing currently. I have another podcast, the Sober Curious podcast, which is all about my last book. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Ruby. I'm so excited to dive into this book. It's much needed in our society today. And thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been really fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.